And welcome to our meetup for this evening, April 22nd, 2014, year of the NSA and ALEC. And those are two of the big issues that we're going to be talking about tonight. First of all, again, let me welcome you all for coming. San Francisco for Democracy is a nonpartisan organization, and we feel that informing voters and encouraging people to get involved in politics, which as much as we'd like to say it doesn't affect us, actually does. You need to be out there, you need to be active. Democracy is not a spectator sport, as I always like to say. One thing we also like to do, at the beginning of these meetings is encourage you all, if you're not a member, to join. We really encourage you to come out and help us out. These meetups only work if we have the people to help them work. And so the more to share the load of putting this together, the better it is for all of us. So we can get more speakers like the two we have this evening, Rainey Reitman and Chris Connolly, to come and tell us about the issues, give us the background and information that we need to make informed decisions about things that are going on that affect our lives, a lot of times when we don't even realize it. So I'm not going to just talk and talk and talk, which is what I do all day, but I'm going to get right down to brass tacks here, so to speak. I'd like to introduce you to Rainey Reitman. She's with the Electronic Freedom Foundation, and she's the activism director. She's also a writer, a privacy advocate, and a person who advocates strongly for government transparency. And we all know that that's one of the things we were promised in the election of 2008 was a whole bunch of transparency, and I see a whole bunch of opaqueness. So, you know, somewhere along the line that got mixed up. She's also founder of two organizations, Freedom of the Press Foundation, which is extremely important, although with our press of Fox and CNN, not much to say about it, but there are some news organizations out there who are trying to do good work, and we need to make sure that they're free to follow those stories that are really important, and that journalists are not out there being shot for going to get a story to inform us. And she's also founder of the Chelsea or Bradley Manning Support Organization. And of course, Bradley Manning was the soldier who released the documents to WikiLeaks that let us know what was going on in our government. Unfortunately for him, he was tortured, but that's a subject for another meetup. But the fact of the matter is that we need this information about what's going on in our government so we can make sure it runs for us, since they are representatives of us. Our second speaker will be Chris Connolly from the ACLU. He's a technologist, you can help me later, and a policy attorney. He works on issues of privacy, free speech, and emerging technologies. And he's also very active in seeing what's going on with the NSA, with drones, and the relationships between organizations as a result. And he told me about another new technology that they've come up with, but it was just making my brain explode. So he said he'd talk about it later. He would tell me right off the bat. So anyway, without further ado, we're going to get started for this evening. And Rainey, would you start off? We're going to give each speaker 15 minutes to talk about issues that are important, that they're aware of, that they can give us information on, and then we're going to have questions afterwards, okay? Okay?
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and please feel free to give me a wave in about 10 minutes, so I'll think about wrapping it up. So my name is Rainey Reitman. I'm the activism director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. How many of you are familiar with the EFF? A few of you? Okay, there's a couple that aren't. So EFF, nonprofit civil liberties law and advocacy center. We focus specifically on how your rights are threatened or endangered by new technologies, and advocate for your rights in both courts of law and in Congress, and also build technologies that can help you protect yourself when you go online. We believe that when you log on, your rights should go with you. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the NSA, and I'm going to keep my comments really brief, but I think it's really important that people, especially politically active people like you guys here in this room, understand what the legal framework is that the NSA is operating in and where it's not operating within that framework, and have just a real simple concept of what the NSA is doing. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about what is EFF doing as far as what are our lawsuits against the NSA and what are the advocacy avenues for actually preventing this type of mass surveillance. And then I'll kick it over to Chris and he'll keep going. So when we think about how laws are made in the United States, many of us think about the whole process of we elect members of Congress work out legislation, they reach agreement, they passes out a committee, it passes that down to the floor, it gets enacted into law, gets signed by the president, you've got a law. There's this other way that people make laws in the United States, and that is through court precedent. We all think about this, but it's a little bit, it's non-intuitive. It's that the courts themselves interpret what laws mean in the United States. And so in many ways, the courts are a body that is making law, that the law that you and I live under is what the courts decided they would interpret. And I think it's really important when we talk about the NSA to remember that really important function of what court precedent does and how we all live under a body of law that's created by a court system. So last year in June, we were all really shocked and really amazed to see The Guardian publish a document. It was a FISC order. It was an order that showed that Verizon business records, so anybody who's got their telephones under Verizon, were being swept up en masse by the National Security Agency. And that this was a 3-month order that said all Verizon business records, all phone records were going to go directly to the NSA. And the actual document itself was published in The Guardian. And Senator Feinstein then said that this document was not unusual, that in fact, this 3-month document was identical to similar orders that had been signed every 3 months for 7 years in a row. And the Wall Street Journal later reported that it was not just Verizon, but in fact a whole range of major telecom companies. The end result being that you and I now have evidence that the government is collecting our telephone records, even though you and I are not suspected of any crime. So many people then said, well, what is this FISA order? Who signed this? Well, who said that this was okay? This order was signed by the FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. Now this is a court that was put together in 1978. It was actually supposed to be a method of stopping abusive surveillance tactics by the federal government. And it was designed to oversee federal attempts to, government applications to conduct surveillance. And we don't know that much about this court because it operates in extreme secrecy. In this courtroom, there isn't your typical courtroom where you've got your judge and your jury and you've got your defendant and you've got your prosecution. It's not like that at all. It's a closed room and the only people that can go in are the judge and the government. The government shows their documents to the judge signs off on them. It is a rubber stamp court. And then you and I never know exactly what it is that they found out. And in fact, the FISA order that was published by The Guardian was our first real glimpse into what the FISA court is doing. So I know I made this big deal earlier about how courts are interpreting the law. And the reason I made that big deal is because I want people to understand that the FISA court today is not just signing off on simple orders. They're actually producing lengthy, extensive legal interpretations, dozens, hundreds of pages long, perhaps. And that these are interpretations of how the United States will be interpreting its own surveillance law. And these documents are under seal, which means that the law under which the National Security Agency is operating is a law that you and I do not have the ability to go and read. It is a law that is secret. And when a secret court makes a secret interpretation of the law, that results in a secret law. So the United States has, and it's unfortunate and it's frustrating for people at the EFF and for the ACLU, but we have a situation where we don't get to know the law the way we ought to. Now, this makes it very difficult to reform the law because it is extremely challenging to write adequate legal reforms and to advocate for those reforms when you and I don't have the ability to actually go and read what the law says. I'm going to talk a little bit about, and I think I'm actually don't have that much time, so I won't talk much about it, about one particular element. And that is a part of the Patriot Act. You're all familiar with the Patriot Act, I assume. Yes. A part of the Patriot Act known as Section 215. This is often considered the library records section or the business records section of the Patriot Act. This section of law says that the government has the ability to get records that are tangible and relevant to an authorized investigation. Again, tangible records relevant to an authorized investigation. The FISA court order that we saw produced and published by The Guardian was an interpretation of this section of law, Section 215. And so the government's argument was that your phone records and his phone records and your phone records were collected because they were relevant to an authorized investigation. You might be thinking, what on earth could my records have to do with an authorized investigation? Not only your records now, but every record for the last 7 years, all your phone records going forward. And the answer is, we didn't get to see what the government argued. We didn't get to see what they argued in court, and we didn't get to see what the courts had been interpreted the law to be. And that has been subject to extensive legal fighting. EFF has been fighting in courts to get access to the legal interpretation of Section 215, as has the ACLU. And we've had some success, but we don't have, for example, the government's legal arguments. So that's one of the things that the NSA is doing, and that's a little bit of how they're going about doing it. The NSA is doing a lot of other things that you may have heard about in the news, including sweeping up internet communications of millions of people worldwide, including people within the United States. We have whistleblower evidence that predates Edward Snowden, indicating that the NSA is receiving tons of internet communications of Americans. We also know that the NSA is undermining encryption. So encryption is the beautiful, magical way that you and I can use the internet today and use technology and feel secure in it. It is the way that you know, for example, that when you log on to your online banking, it's actually your bank that you're talking to and that those are secure transactions. It's how you know that you are able to send emails and the person next to you in the coffee shop isn't reading them at the same time as they're transmitted. It's the way you're able to buy things on Amazon.com and feel secure in it. And it is frankly the way that we know that air traffic controllers can communicate and all sorts of other people can do things. Our whole world relies on computers and our whole world relies on strong encryption. And one of the things we found out, and I think in many ways the most disturbing thing we found out about what the NSA is doing, is that they're working hard to undermine encryption, to make it more difficult for technology companies to have really strong, really powerful encryption. And I think that can have, that has ramifications now, but that could have serious ramifications for the health of the internet and the health of technology for decades to come. And I would also like to just mention that what we know now about the NSA is the result of leaks. 5 minutes, I'll wrap it up. And there's probably much, much more that we will learn. So there's a whole bunch of things that we're doing about this. As I mentioned before, EFF is engaged in lawsuits, so we have a impact litigation team that is fighting the NSA. We're fighting them in court on both the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment. Our most recent lawsuit against the NSA, we're representing 22 different clients from a whole range of political spectrums that are saying that this is affecting their First Amendment rights to assembly. We're also engaged in advocacy. That's the part I do. I've thrown a rally in Washington, D.C. We've had days of actions. We most recently had a day of action in which over 90,000 people called Congress and demanded an end to mass surveillance. We're working to do international pressure and pass UN resolutions against this type of surveillance, and then we're also working for technical solutions. I wanted to kind of wrap up by talking about, what can you do? And the most important thing you can do, well, there's actually a whole bunch of important things you can do. I'm going to take that next time to talk about it. The first is ACLU and EFF and these other civil liberties organizations. We obviously rely on our members to stand with us and support us, so that's one thing. But it really, being a member of an organization is just one tiny, tiny part of it. The rest of it is being willing to speak out. Being willing to, for example, meet with your member of Congress or with their staffer when they're in your home district, to pick up the phone and call your member of Congress and say, I'm concerned about this, write a physical letter, or even just sign an email petition. I also think there's an incredibly important role for politically aware citizens to, or individuals to educate others. If you understand that this is an important issue, then you should be telling your friend, and if you think it's an important issue, then you should be writing an op-ed and publishing it in a local paper. It's something all of us can do, and it makes a huge, huge effect. I would also say there is a wonderful organization local here in San Francisco called the Shame on Feinstein Coalition. And they are working to push Senator Feinstein to, Senator Feinstein has been championing a bill that would try to entrench surveillance, try to codify into law the worst aspects of NSA surveillance. And the Shame on Feinstein Coalition is pushing back in a big way. And I would just end by saying that there's a really powerful reform proposal moving through Congress right now. It's called the USA Freedom Act. I'm not going to lie to you, it does not do everything I would like to see it do. There's a heck of a lot more that we need to do to stop NSA surveillance. But it's a bill with a ton of co-sponsors, it's moving, and if it passes, it could well be the most important surveillance reform in our lifetime. And so this is an unusual opportunity to try to push for reform, and I can't possibly urge you enough to do what you can to help us get the USA Freedom Act passed, and then to push for additional reforms. I will now kick it over to my friend Chris.
All right.